This conference will now be recorded.
Not intimidating at all.
Oh, you're recorded now. Good morning. This is my first time being recorded, except for being deposed, so that's something, right? Okay, so we're gonna get started, and I'm Lisa Calvin, and I'm with enforcement with the long-term care division. So when you're receiving all your surveys in the mail, when your facility receives them, you're usually gonna receive them from me or the other enforcement workers in our little division of currently 4. We had, my supervisor just retired. She usually does part of today's presentation. So she retired, and then we have another person retiring soon. So looks like it's gonna be me for a while. Training the newbies.
Lucky you.
Yeah, lucky me. Okay, so we're gonna get started today. I have several presentations that he's sent out before. So you guys can refer to those. If you have questions, ask them. I can help somewhat. If I don't know the answer, you can send me an email and I'll find you the answer, hopefully. Things are changing so quickly. You guys know it out there. Things are going to look different. And they have been looking different for months as you receive deficiencies. The letters on the front look different because the guidance changes like every couple months. And sometimes there's a lag between teaching us those changes and how to implement them in the letters. And so then therefore it gets to you guys later too. So it's just, the government. Anyway, so we're gonna get started. The first thing I want you to look at real quickly is, no, this is the Booker, so. The scope and severity grid. Now the scope and severity grid is important to long-term care because when you receive your deficiencies, hopefully you don't get any, right? Hopefully you get something that says no deficiencies were cited. That'd be awesome every time. But it doesn't always happen that way. So one of the things that I keep handy, and this actually hangs over my desk at all times, and even before I was working for the state, I have had it handy as an administrator. So this tells me all the different levels and of deficiencies. So you start at the bottom. This is the lowest severity level. So this is severity up and down. And then as you move over here, those are, that's the scope of them, okay? So if you'll look, when you look in your definitions that I've also provided, important terms and definitions, scope is this deficiency, how, blah, 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 blah. Okay, the scope of the deficiency reflects the pervasiveness of the deficiency throughout the facility, and the severity of the deficiency reflects the impact of the deficiency has on the safety of the individual. So, like I said, severity moves up. The ones at the low end down here is low severity. The columns, as you move further along, is the scope. So if I have a scope and severity of the A, there was no actual harm with potential or minimum harm to the resident, isolated one or very limited number of residents affected. Okay, so what is also important in this is everything that's on this ABC level, this is the lowest level of scope and severity. This is, these are actually in compliance. So if you get something cited at A, B, or C, your facility is actually in substantial compliance, okay? As long as no other deficiency was cited at a higher scope and severity. Now,
Ma'am,
yes.
can you hear me?
Are you pointing this? Are you pointing on your screen? Because if we are, the people online can't see if you're pointing or.
Okay, yes. So the
Sorry about that.
level, I'm sorry. So let's see I'm trying to think. Rows and columns get me all confused. So the bottom row is ABC severity, scope and severity of the deficiencies. So that bottom row, those deficiencies cited as a scope and severity of A, B, or C are actually in compliance, as long as no other deficiency or tag was cited at a scope and severity higher than that bottom row. Okay. Now, if all of your deficiencies you receive are cited at a C, for example, except for one that is cited at an F, which is right above on the second row, then when you receive an enforcement letter, it's going to say your highest citation was a scope and severity F. Okay, you are not in compliance because of that. We go by the highest citation. Okay, the highest scope and severity of citation. So if they are cited on the bottom row, A, B, C, you're in compliance. If they're cited at A or B, we're not going to need a plan of correction for them. Okay. If they're cited at C, while you're in compliance, we're still going to need a plan of correction. And it will request that in your letter that you receive. Okay, as you work from left to right in the columns, that is the scope of the deficiency. So if the bottom level is the severity of the deficiency, as you work to the right, that is the scope. So it goes from isolated, you'll see that in all the boxes listed on the first column, level A being isolated for no actual harm with potential for minimal harm. The next row is isolated, one or a very limited number of residents affected. When you get to the third row, which is severity G, now this is where there's actual harm on this whole row. So isolated is one or a very limited number of persons were affected. And severity J, this isn't immediate jeopardy, but it's isolated to one or a very limited number of residents. So that is the scope is that, you know, the determination of if it's isolated, which is this row. The next row is a pattern. Excuse me, the next column is a pattern. So everything down that middle column, so K, H, E, B, those are at a pattern. So more than a very limited number of residents were affected. And then in the last column, these are widespread, that's the scope. Pervasive problems throughout the facility, okay? So this is a grid that you want to keep handy at your desk. It's going to help you whether you are, you know, just identifying what your plan of correction should be, as well as it's going to help you with this scope and severity is actually cited on all the nursing home surveys that I'm talking about, whether it's Medicaid, Medicaid, or both, as well as all the assisted living surveys. So if you are somebody that works with a continuum of care, you might be over assisted living and a nursing home, and then resident cares as well. Okay, so this is something you want to keep handy because it's going to be referenced every time you get deficiencies. And not only that, as you do quality assurance work to prevent deficiencies from happening, it can be important as well. Okay. Okay, so this is the definition, important terms. And definitions. So there's your scope and severity at the top. Substantial compliance. The facility has no deficiencies with the scope and severity of higher than a C. And like I said before, if you have a scope and severity of a C, you will be required to submit a plan of correction for it. This is most common when there's life safety tags. Many times they're going to have to come back and check something to make sure that, you know, your sprinklers are working and they've seen that you've actually got it going, you've already got the work orders and stuff, but it's not fixed yet. They may have you submit a plan of correction and then they come back and check it. But a lot of times when you see scope and severity of C, that you're usually in the life safety section. Okay, denial of payment for new admissions. The DPNA must be imposed if the facility is not in substantial compliance 3 months after the exit date, or when the facility has had a scope and, a substandard quality of care on the last 3 consecutive surveys. In your letter that you receive, your enforcement letter, there will be a date that is identified as your denial of payment for new admissions. So does that mean that you're just not going to get paid for new admissions after that date? Does anybody know the answer to that? Okay, here's how that works. There will be a hold placed on your payment for new admissions, because you may hit that date, but then that's determined by healthcare. They're the ones that, the healthcare authority, they're the ones that will cut that off. We just report what that date is to them. What they're going to be looking for from us after that point is a date of compliance for your facility. So the sooner you get into compliance, okay, so let me give you this example. So let's say that you have your survey, let's see, 3 months ago. What was that? What is today, the 10th? Okay, so let's say you have it, your survey 3 months ago, and September 10th was your DPNA date. But maybe they haven't come back to do your revisit yet. And you put on your plan of correction that you were going to have everything fixed by September 5th. Let's say survey comes tomorrow or next week even, and they find that, yes, everything was corrected by September 5th. Well, they're going to plug that in as your compliance date. So then you, because you had it corrected before your DPNA date went into effect, it will be retroactive to that date. They will go back and they will pay for new admissions to that, starting at that date, okay? However, let's say that they come and do your revisit next week and they don't, is not corrected. The denial of payments for new admissions would kick in on today until it was actually corrected, okay? So you'll have to get your deficiencies, submit a POC, correct it, and then when they find that it's corrected and you're in compliance, that's when you're, you can be paid for those new admissions.
Is that just for Medicare and Medicaid? They got it for private pay people?
Yeah, private pay people, I mean, you're gonna bill them just like regular, because there's no regulation on them. You have a contract with them, so. Okay, so denial of payments of new admission. The next one on here is optional denial of payments for new admission, or ODPNA. This can also be called discretionary DPNA in some of the letters, because they have to change the verbiage in the state versus to get it the same as EMS right now. So everything has to go through a legal process. It's the same thing. Optional and discretionary is the same thing. So ODPNA, may be imposed when the facility is not in compliance and the survey agency or the CMS has given a 15-day notice. Now, if you have an IJ at your facility that was not removed prior to the exit, then it becomes a 2-day DPNA. But anytime it's substandard quality of care, it's going to be a 15-day. And then anytime it is, many times when it's G or above on the grid, you're going to have a 15-day. There may be some exceptions based on what the tag number is, but we will align it. That'll be addressed in the letter. Okay, so now the definition of substandard quality of care. Let me see if I can roll this down. There's a new definition put into place in 2016. It's still considered new because there were a lot of people that have been administrators and working in this field for years and years and years. So the new definition of substandard quality of care provides that substandard quality of care means one or more deficiencies which constitute either immediate jeopardy to resident health or safety, a pattern of widespread or actual harm that's not immediate jeopardy, or widespread potential for more than minimum harm, but less than immediate jeopardy with no actual harm. There are certain areas, and you can look over this, I'm not going to read all of this information because I've got something even handier for you, and I wish that I would have had it long, long ago. Because it makes life easy as far as identifying what is considered substandard quality of care in a nursing home setting. But it's all these tags right here. Substandard quality of care is defined in the CFR, and it includes all the tags on the second page that says substandard quality of care is defined by, if you're listening and can't see what I'm pointing to, it starts with F550 and it ends with F883, and there's a big group of them. And I'm going to show you one more thing real quick before we skip down to the bottom of this document, because I have provided you a federal regulatory group for long-term care facilities handout, and it is on the screen right now. And all the ones in red that are F, H, I, J, K, or L, if they're cited at that scope and severity, then they are substandard quality of care. There's a backside to this also, and it outlines all those tag sets that were in the middle and has the name of the tag. And that's for easy reference. And it's one of those things you stick on your bulletin board or put in a sheet protector and keep handy. Laminate it, something. It was actually provided one time to surveyors, and we were like, we just need to give this to the administrators because they need this information too. So when they went and renamed the tags, because before they were like 200 and something and so, a while back they renamed all the tags, and now they start at 550, and I believe it's 550. I guess I should look, but they start at a lower number. They start at 300 and something, but they renamed a whole bunch of the tags, and people knew tag numbers. And so when they did that, they created this sheet for us to look at to easily refer to them. So that's something to keep handy, because everything that is in red, if it's cited at F or above, then it is substandard quality of care, except for if it's cited at G. G is never substandard quality of care. okay? G is never substandard quality of care. Now, it is one of the tags for actual harm, but there can be accidents that are not actually substandard quality of care, and that is why that's one of the reasons it's like that. We have questions out there in internet land about that? Okay, back to terms and definitions. I'm briefly going over these as best I can. I'm giving you a lot of information, and I understand that. But when we get into the PowerPoint that I brought with me, talking about it now is going to make it a little bit clearer later. So immediate jeopardy. This means a situation in which the provider is non-compliant to one or more requirements of participation has caused or is likely to cause serious injury, harm, impairment, or death to a resident. So these are the deficiencies that are cited at that top row on the scope and severity grid at J, K, or L. J meaning it's, just an isolated IJK, a pattern, and L, a widespread. Okay. Termination. Termination means termination of the Medicare and or Medicaid provider agreement. Okay, so when you have a survey, the first survey, so let's say surveys today, this is your first time, you're in compliance before today. Now you're having the survey. And surveys there, when we cut your enforcement letter, we're not only gonna, talk about the scope and severity of your deficiencies, but it's also gonna address what your DPNA date is set based on what that scope and severity is. And it will also set a termination date, 6 months from the date of the survey. So 6 months from today, today's the exit date of the survey. Okay, so 6 months from the exit date of the survey. And that means you have between now and then to get everything in compliance, because we know sometimes it's difficult if somebody calls a complaint in and you already are out of compliance, and then they come and find something else, and then somebody, every time a survey's on campus, everybody's like, oh, I should call them and complain about this. And so that is when somebody else will call and, or, you never know. You have to terminate somebody for abuse and neglect. They're gonna call and complain about somebody else. So with that happening, sometimes it takes facilities a while to get in compliance because it just depends how many squeaky wheels are there a lot of times. So you got 6 months to get everything wrapped up and be in compliance with all the surveys during that time. Now, if you are, for example, we said survey was today, they're exiting today, and they cited us, maybe 5 deficiencies and nothing is higher than an E. That's an opportunity to correct. That means right here, there's an opportunity to correct. The facility has an opportunity to correct deficiencies before the penalties are. So if you have an opportunity to correct, you have a 90-day DPNA from the beginning of the survey, the exit date of the survey. You have a 6-month termination date from that. So you're not having any money penalties imposed or anything like that. Right now, there's only one exception to this. I'm going to tell you about that real quick because it is not addressed in any of these slides. Because of COVID and the regulations around infection control, one exception is F880. If you have a deficiency, the nursing home cited at F880, starting at a D, and you have a history of F80 on anything within the last year, then you will you'll have a faster DPNA date. It may be 45 days, it may be 30, depending on how many of those F8. I've been saying this like for months now, F880 and FF80 instead of, it's all confusing for me. Because it was all a fun game and now it's tripping me. Okay. So anyway, if you have, maybe you've been cited twice in the last year at that tag for D or above, that means you're going to have a 30-day DPNA. If you've only been cited once, you're going to have a 45-day DPNA. And there are money penalties that are attached to these also. Now, the state does not impose those. We are leaving that up to CMS. We just say, hey, we've had 2 citations of this within the last years, their last standard survey, and they determine what that is. But generally, they're like 5,000, 10,000, 15,000, and they progress based on that citation and what scope and severity it was at. So you have an opportunity to correct on those, with that being the caveat, that exception to the rule right now. And that's usually not one. So it just so happens that it is right now because there are so many facilities out there that are, one, not reporting to CDC. I opened a case yesterday. They had 10 different active CDC reporting cases open that I had to look through to get to the one that I was working on. Because usually we have no, there's not more than one enforcement case that's active at one time. But this is one of those exceptions to the rule. So now they have like 10 CDC reporting and then the actual active case that we're monitoring. So, okay. So you have an opportunity to correct with that one caveat. But there's also no opportunity to correct. And this is called immediate imposition. The facility will not have an opportunity to correct the deficiencies prior to civil money penalties being imposed. We will recommend, typically in the past, we have recommended a money penalty based on the calculation tool that CMS has provided us. And then when CMS reviews it, sometimes they increase it, and sometimes they decide, no, that's a little bit, they didn't think maybe the surveyor met the, explained it to the level of the scope and severity, like the evidence didn't match what they put in there sometimes, and so they may lower it. They were like, you know, the surveyor cited it at, you know, an H, and maybe we can support it at a G sometimes. So, but sometimes they will look at it, they'll do the calculations themselves, they'll make recommendations. Sometimes they will recommend a directed plan of correction or a temporary, somebody to do directed in services, and sometimes temporary managers or a temporary liaison to basically go in and make sure people, they're doing it right. Because we had a facility a couple of years ago that they had a brand new nurse and a brand new administrator, and they were out in the middle of nowhere, that there wasn't a lot of resources, and they were in over their head because of the level of care that the residents needed. We had to assign somebody to go in and assist them with training staff and training that administrator and nurse. So. Okay, so no opportunity to correct. It's called immediate imposition. Basically, we'll recommend money penalties. CMS will then give you the final amount in the letter they send you. Now, CMS sends all of their notices over fax. and we will send ours an email. Civil money penalty is the same thing as CMP. CMP may be assessed per day or per instance. So if we see that, let's see, one that I did the other day, there was abuse going on, and it involved 6 different residents. So I had to look back to where the abuse started. What day was the abuse, evident? What the evidence showed me when that started. So I chose the date, and I recommended that date to CMS because right now with the COVID situation, before we would recommend our monetary amount for civil money penalties in the letters, and now we're just leaving it up to CMS and making a recommendation to them. So, but it's assessed per day. So I looked at the earliest evidence of abuse for those 6 residents and chose that date to be the start date. Now, if it was one instance and it didn't happen again, and maybe they even corrected it, maybe a per instance. So sometimes we'll go in and we'll find past non-compliance. We've had past non-compliance IJs even, that there was an IJ at the time, but the facility gathered the wagons and they got everybody on board, they trained the staff and they fixed it, but it still happened and it shouldn't have happened. And that's when it would be a past non-compliance IJ. And so the fine will be just for that instance that it happened. So it'd be per instance. Okay. Plan of correction. A plan of correction is an affidavit that the facility will make to achieve and maintain compliance. An acceptable plan of correction includes how corrective action is going to be accomplished, address the other residents that having the potential to be affected, address measures put in place to ensure that efficient practice will not reoccur, and how the facility plans to monitor its performance. And down to the next page. Like that. Dates of when the corrective action will be completed. So you're going to give a alleged correction date, basically. When you're saying the facility is going to be in compliance. Now, you need to make sure that you have plenty of time to monitor, to retrain your staff or your residents, whatever, you don't mention doctors, whatever you need to do that is part of that corrective action, you need to make sure that all that is going to have time to have been accomplished by the alleged plan of correction date. Because that's what those surveyors are looking for. They're going to come back to see if it's actually corrected. Have you done all those things you said you were going to do by that date? Okay. There are links here that I've included because they're important. So the S&C letters, you can go and see all the current, it says S&C, it's QSO now, all the current letters from CMS about survey, certification, and quality, everything. Okay. Federal regs, links, and then state laws and rules for nursing homes, and then the guidance determining immediate jeopardy. All that's at the bottom if you need it or you choose to go in there and look some more. Okay, so it's been a while since I've been up here presenting, so bear with me a little bit. Does anybody out there in internet land have any questions? Okay. Okay, so real quick before we move on to the PowerPoint. When you receive your plan of excuse me. When you receive your statement of deficiencies, also called the CMS 2567. They look basically like this. The top, there's an exit date. This one, the exit date is 4/5/2017. Can everybody follow along out there? Because this one's got all kinds of circles, and want to make sure we're all on the same page. Okay, the next circle down is the completion date. So this is going to be where you're going to enter in that bar column for each deficiency also. That's important. Each deficiency should have a POC date or a date of completion for your plan of correction when you submit it. The first column over to the left-hand side has the tag number. At the top, it will have initial comments. It tells the type of survey and the complaint numbers, if applicable, in that section of initial comments. So it'll say something like, state surveyors come out to do a abbreviated survey on complaint number blah, blah, and blah. I don't know. Maybe they're just working 3 complaints and that's why they're there. Other times it'll say the COVID focused survey was completed at your facility on blah, 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 in conjunction with complaint number and whatever. Other times it'll say standard or recertification survey. These are all different kinds right now. It'll identify basically initial comments, whether tags were cited or not, okay? And then right below, it'll have the tags. So in this one, in this far left column, the tag is cited and it's a scope and severity of a K that is right underneath the tag number. In the next column, it says this is a tag for medication staffing. And then after that, it lists the regulatory reference set. And then it goes on to the bottom big circle with the deficient practice statement, which describes how the facility failed to comply with the regulation. And when you submit your plan of correction, the area where all these little boxes are over to the side with the arrows that point over, that's basically where your plan of correction is going to be entered. And you're going to enter something for each tag. And again, in the far right-hand column, you will have a completion date for each tag. When we receive plan of corrections, we look through to see what the latest date of correction is that is entered on there. And this goes for your life safety and your health. So if you had a recertification survey and your life safety is saying that they're not going to be completed until, let's see, February the 13th, and the rest that your nurses, they got together and they're going to have it completed by the end of December, then we have to look at that February 13th date. That becomes the alleged plan of correction. And it gets put on there as the alleged plan of correction for the whole plan of correction. So be mindful of that. You want to get things fixed, but you need to be prepared that it's going to be working on the last date, the latest date of correction. Okay? And don't shoot yourself in the foot by going past your DP&A if you can help it. So, okay. Now, down at the bottom, there's an area always at the bottom for administrator signature and the date that the administrator signs off. It's important that we receive an administrator signature dated when we have a plan of correction. The plan of correction is supposed to be signed by the administrator when it's submitted. And really, there's only one, I guess one time that we would excuse that. And that's if you don't have an administrator, but you're hiring one, and somebody should be appointed to be in charge of your facility. Many times it's the DON, so they will sign, and when they send in the plan of correction, they'll say in the email, you know, we don't have an administrator currently, interviews are in process, I've been designated, blah, 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 and then a signature block. What we do look for is a signature block for the administrator if that POC comes in unsigned. If the administrator sent it and they have a signature block from the facility that designates, you know, identifies who they are, many times we accept it because we don't have time to mess around with it. We just include that in our scan job when we send it over for filing. So, I mean, we prefer everybody to sign the bottom of them, but we do have some exceptions, and that would be to make sure that the administrator has a signature block. However, sometimes we communicate with a lot of administrators so often, they don't include signature blocks on the bottom of their things anymore. There's a couple I can think of off the top of my head. He's like, hey, Lisa, blah, 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 blah. And just his name. I'm like, okay, I know who you are, but if it was a POC and he didn't sign the bottom of it, which has happened with this gentleman, that's why I'm thinking of it multiple times, then I have to send it back and say, hey, you've got to sign it. So administrator needs to sign it, we need a signature on the bottom. Now, we ask, and we now, so more than any other time, that when you send in your plan of correction, you actually tell us what the name of your facility is in the subject line, the date of the survey, and the survey event. Because every single survey that we go out in is a sign-in event number. And it makes it way hard for us. We have emails come in all the time that say, hey, I didn't get this and I didn't get that. And we have to then go back through this process of finding out what facility the people are even with, because we don't know. I got one yesterday asking me about bed changes. I don't even know what facility they're with. So maybe I'll have an email back from them when I get back. But at the bottom of all of the forms, middle bottom, there's an event ID. If the event ID ends in 11, it's the first survey in the series. If it ends in 12, it's the second survey in the series or the revisit. Life safety surveys end in 2-1 and 2-2, 2-3, etc. The life safety starts with a 2, health starts with a 1. Okay, and so when we send out emails, most of us try to say what facility we're sending it to, the date. You get it from me, it's going to say what kind of survey it was, like right now, COVID complaint or whatever. And then it'll have an event ID over to the side. So really, if you reply and just attach your POC, you should be good. There is a new email address that I will tell you about right now. If you want to send your POCs to, it is only for enforcement. That way it's only coming to our team and not going through the complaints and everybody else to get to us. It is LTC enforcement health.ok.gov. If you are sending in directed plans of correction or plans of correction, if you will send it to that address, it will get to the right place quicker. Okay. Well, we're going to move on to the enforcement presentation. Really. Okay. So enforcement. Enforcement. It's not a picnic. It's complicated and it gets more complicated every time we have a crisis. So. Hold on. Well,
Okay.
I guess I need something so I can flip the. I was like, I know there's some gimmick to it, and I was like, it's been a long time. I mean, we weren't here last time, so. Okay, so feel free to ask questions. You'll probably have several throughout the presentation. Obviously, I did, so. Okay, so different objectives. I pretty much outlined that a lot with your terms and definitions. I'm not going to go over this. It is here if you need to refer back to it. I just want to make sure if you're administrator that you understand this information. Okay, laws and rules. We are governed by Title 18 and 19 and the Code of Federal Regulations, as well as Oklahoma Administrative Code. So different tax sets, for example, you are cited F tags. Those are the federal tags if you're a nursing home. And L tags, those are the licensure tags. So that's state guided if you're a nursing home. Those are where those come from. Okay, and OS Title 63, this is the Nursing Home Care Act and Long-Term Care Security Act. So this is the regulations that this information comes from and that we base decisions on. Oklahoma agencies and entities, Oklahoma Healthcare Authority. So this is who your contract is with, right? For your provision of Medicaid, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, Oklahoma State Department of Health. So we actually do your survey and recommend the enforcement. And then Health Resources Development Services. This is who issues your licenses. And then at the bottom, nursing facilities, NF, and skilled nursing facilities, SNF, and Medicare. If any beds, and that's any, are certified for Medicare payment, the final decision of all enforcement action rests with CMS regional office. State may and will recommend action, but CMS has the final authority. So just so you know how that works, we go out and we do a survey and it's opportunity to correct, and it doesn't have to have 880 decided. Your case is going to stay with us until the next survey. The next survey, you correct it, then we just report that you corrected it to CMS and close it up. And it's tied up in a little bow and we move on. If you don't correct it that second time, we then transfer the case to CMS. They can look at this stuff anytime, but they're not gonna get in there and look at it until it gets transferred to them and they get my notes on it or something. Because they don't have a need to, there's nothing to worry about, and there's bigger fish to fry. So, you know, that's the way it is. So if we get to the point where we are recommending action, that's gonna be on that second visit that didn't clear, or maybe anytime it's a second survey on the cycle. Because in nursing homes, we work off of the cycle start date. So today was your first date of noncompliance at exit, then that's the survey that starts the cycle. So that cycle can go anywhere up to 6 months. It's kind of been elongated lately because everything went in suspension from March 23rd to the end of May. And so some of those cycles are still not wrapped up because of that suspension period, and new regulations went into place. So this is one of those weird times where we usually have one cycle open, and sometimes right now we have 3 because at 6/1, we had to start new cycles for anybody that got deficiencies because they're under a different regulation. And then I think the same thing's gonna be forward from like the rest of the year. It's a separate one. So we will recommend it. CMS has the final authority though. Medicaid only. If the facility is certified only for Medicaid payment and there's no Medicare certification, enforcement authority rests within the state. Oklahoma Healthcare Authority has delegated all enforcement authority to the Oklahoma State Department of Health. So we take care of enforcement. They just take care of your we report it to them and they take care of their part. They will kick in that DPNA on those denial payment of new admissions though. We report it to them and they are the ones that control that money, of course, okay? Scope and severity grid, again, here's it, just a little bit minimalist so that you can look at it easily. The minimum potential at the bottom, like I said, those are still in compliance. You have substantial compliance at that point. Then you have potential for harm on that that next row, D, E, and F. Actual harm cited at G, H, and I, and immediate jeopardy at the top, J, K, and L. The first column is isolated. The second column, pattern, and the last column, a widespread. Okay, opportunity to correct and no opportunity to correct. So opportunity to correct, you're going to get an opportunity to correct those deficiencies before penalties are going to be imposed. No opportunity to correct, well, it's the opposite. You're going to have immediate imposition of penalties. There's no requirement that a facility be given an opportunity to correct deficiencies before penalties are imposed, period. That's just really the way that we do it. Facility will usually be given an opportunity to correct deficiencies before remedies are imposed. Unless, one, they have an IJ, whether it's removed or not, the deficiencies that are cited at J, K, and L will be attached to a CMP, a civil money penalty, and they will also affect a quicker DPNA date. If it's past non-compliance, you're not going to have a DPNA imposed. You're just going to be cited because it's already corrected technically. You're just going to be cited the CMP for that past non-compliance issue. Deficiencies, that represents substandard quality of care. So that's any of them on that federal regulation chart. That is how, that were red, that I showed you earlier. Anything that's F and then H and above, they're automatically going to be substandard quality of care, and you're not gonna have an opportunity to correct for the penalty imposed. Double G situations. This is something special, and we're going to talk about it, so I'm not going to go deep into that because it's complicated. Deficiencies with the scope and severity of a G in any substandard quality of care regulations section. So if it was highlighted in red again, and you get cited at G, you will have money penalties attached to it and a DPNA that will be bumped up a little bit quicker, but G is not substandard quality of care, but if it is in that regulatory set, then it is a no opportunity to correct. And then special focus facilities. Anybody know what special focus facilities are? Okay, so anytime in the state, at any given time in the state, there are 2 special focus facilities assigned. And these are chosen off of like star rating from CMS. And basically we look at what the facilities are that need help. And they have, at least in their history over the last several years, we'll identify those, they go into a pot, and then we recommend who's going to be the next special focus facility. Special focus facilities get 2 times as many surveys. Until they can have 2 surveys with E or less and get them corrected really quickly, at that point, we can graduate them. And it's very complicated, and I think I'm gonna have more about it at the next time I come back. Sue usually goes over that, and she usually goes over it the second time that we come, so. But special focus facilities with deficiencies of F or higher. So while a lot of the facilities may get penalized at harm, which would be a G and above, or an F that's in a substandard quality of care grouping, any of them in special focus facilities of F could warrant penalties. The goal is not to penalize those facilities more. It's to help them improve and get on a fast track to do it. And so there's a lot more information provided to them many times, and surveyors around them more. Instead of 1 research during a given amount of time, there'll be 2. Okay. No opportunity to correct, immediate imposition. Double G is when a facility has deficiencies of actual harm and above on the current survey and on the previous standard survey, or any intervening survey in between. So if we're here for a standard survey today and you have a G, let's say it's a G at F600, which is abuse, okay? So we're automatically going to be citing a G, and because it's that, it's going to get a fine for that abuse. It'll get a 15-day DPNA also because of that. What I'm going to do when I get your enforcement packet and it's got all this information, I'm going to be looking at when the last time you got G or above was. If it wasn't with it before, if we can go all the way back to the last standard survey and there wasn't any on any of those, it's not a double G situation. However, if maybe there was a complaint in February and it was a past non-compliance IJ, for example. And so you had something cited at J, but it was fixed before survey came. It was still something that was cited at higher, G and above prior, since the last standard survey. So at that point, it becomes a double G situation. Basically what that means is CMS, when they get the case, they may impose a higher money penalty or some other remedy, especially if that, they may come up with another remedy like directed plan of correction or something like that, especially if that PNC IJ was in the same tab, on the same tab. So they're looking for, are these tags being repeated over and over? And are they at that harm and above? And if it's they're looking at G or higher, no matter what. But if it's in the same tag set, it can be a higher penalty problem. Okay. This is reflective of scope and severity of G or above on the enforcement grid. That's what we call double G. So we're going to look at some situations real quick. And here's a classic double G. So in April, let's say last April, we went out and had a standard survey, and there was a citation of something at G. When we went back, I said April, but March, anyway, when we went back in May, that one cleared. They went into substantial compliance. When we went back in November, we had a complaint investigation at an E. Went back in January, it cleared. And then in February, we had the next standard survey, and something was cited at a G. Okay, because it is standard survey to standard survey or recertification to recertification, same difference. And you have 2 citations of a G within that time, it's a double G situation. Okay, here's a self double G. Standard survey. We go out, there's an E. I'm cited at an E. We go back in May, it clears. We go out in November on a complaint, which is a G. And then we go back out in February and another G is cited. Those complaints can sneak up on you because you're looking back to the last standard survey. And this one, in this case, hasn't even been corrected from November. And then we're back out there with another citation at a level G.
I have a question.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
so the G's can be two totally separate incidents or violations, correct?
Yes.
It doesn't have to be the same thing reoccurring.
No, it's a G and above anytime between one standard survey to the next standard survey.
Okay.
Okay. Okay.
Is that completed being substantiated? Does that make a difference? Whether it's substantiated or not substantiated?
No, because it's still a double G that falls in between there. Yeah. Okay. Here is a complaint only double G. Okay, so we go out for the standard survey in March. At an E, we go back in May, and it clears. A few days later, on the 15th of May, we go out on a complaint. It is cited at a G. We return in August. It is cleared, and then another complaint investigation occurs in December. And it's only a D. It clears in February. And then, I don't know why it's going off the side of the page, but let's see if I can get that to move down so we can see. Okay. I'm just gonna stick it somewhere for now. We'll come back to it. Then we go out for a complaint investigation the following March. And it is decided at a scope and severity of H. So we haven't done that next standard survey yet, okay? So you still got the gap between the standard survey from March to this following March, and those G or higher fell in between those standard surveys. Okay, so it's still a double G. Let's see if I can put this somewhere where it's not going to interfere much. There it works. There it works. Okay, is that the same one?
I think maybe you move that little thing and now it's
Of course, you know,
focused on that and not
can't be
the,
happy now, can we?
if you click the PowerPoint, maybe it will work.
Okay, let's try this again.
You guys at home can grab that and move it up on the screen, on your screen at home. You can make it bigger by the little controls at home. Her screen is just a full screen. She can't move that.
Yeah, it's looking crazy. Okay, so here's a situation that does not have a double G. Okay, so we went out and did a complaint in March with the scope and severity of a case, so they had an immediate jeopardy. We went back in April, on April 15th, and it cleared. Okay, in May, we went out for a standard survey. It was cited as an E. In June, we went out for a complaint investigation, cited it as an H. Now, if you'll notice, the May standard survey is still not cleared. And now we have the complaint investigation at H that's not cleared. We go back in August and we clear both of them. So this is not a double G situation. Okay, so because that standard survey is what marked, you know, going, we, at that point, we're looking all the way back to the previous standard survey. If there wasn't anything on that previous standard survey, and so that IJ was the only thing that had occurred that was higher than a G and above, it would not be considered a double G situation. Questions about that? Sometimes it's clear as mud. Okay, mandatory action. Denial of payment for new admissions if the facility is not in substantial compliance 3 months after the last date of the survey identifying non-compliance. These are both of these things, every time you're not in compliance, these are mandatory actions. So you're going to receive a DP&A date. You're also going to receive a termination date. So denial of payment, if everything is opportunity to correct and everything, then you got 3 months before that DP&A is going to hit. And it will have a date assigned in your enforcement letter. Termination of all Medicare and Medicaid payments if the facility is not in substantial compliance within 6 months of the last day of the survey. So when you get your first survey on the cycle, your termination date is 6 months from the exit date, which is what the date of your survey is going to be on, because it goes off the exit date. Substandard quality of care. So see the important terms and definitions handout that I gave you. The state must take 2 specific actions when there's substandard quality of care. They to notify the intending physician of each resident who receives substandard quality of care. Okay, so after your letter, there will be a form and it'll have like the resident numbers and a place to put the physician's information in. So it'll be right after the enforcement letter if you receive substandard quality of care on your survey. And then you'll send that information. Like it says in there, to send it to you. We also have to notify the State Board of Examiners for long-term care administrators. So anytime a survey occurs where there's substandard quality of care, if you're the administrator on record, then I'll be sending Z a little letter that says, you know, on July 6th, we completed the survey, substandard quality of care was cited at this tag, and this person was the administrator. So, and then it's in their hands to. Okay. So those are the 2 mandatory actions that are taken when substandard quality of care occurs.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So what if you come in and you find that there's substandard care and someone else was administrator and like you took over? Do you get that?
Okay, I'll address that. That actually just happened. Yeah. So people at home, she asked, what if you come in and you take over as administrator, but actual substandard quality of care was occurring prior to your taking over, like you inherited it?
Right.
Basically what I looked at, and actually called the facility this week to ask them when somebody started, because a different administrator had been there when the actual deficient practice was going on. And by the time the survey exited, this other lady was the administrator. So I look at where the substandard quality of care started. And that's who I'm referring over. If it's not clear and you're the administrator on record, it will be sent over with your name on it and you can address that with them. Because sometimes we don't have that information, but this time I did, and it's been like, we've been tracking that a little bit better because we have been having to call facilities so many times to get emails. I mean, if you've been in the facilities, you know we're calling you asking for emails. Because when we've been working remotely, I don't think, and I know other departments were working remotely, the information was in our program. I was like, that person's not the administrator. They haven't been there for a while. And I don't know that because they're with this other facility. And like, I'll watch administrators go all over the place. And so, you know, sometimes we don't know though. And, but we've been having to call and get the administrator's email address and name a lot because maybe they haven't had a COVID survey recently and we haven't had to send them anything for 6 months. We don't know who it is. And the HRDS, they were out teleworking for a while. So when they came back, they have all this paperwork that they're sorting through, updating all the information from that notice of change forms that were submitted on paper instead of digitally. Like, we've been able to process child's and initials and all these other things on digitally if we received it digitally. But while we were out of the office, like, for example, I ended up with COVID. I caught it at work. So I go out to like March the 20th, and I don't go back to work till April the 8th. And all that time, the papers were going into the office. And so I came back when we had to clean out our offices because they were going to redo our floor. And they were supposed to be remodeling this floor. And so we had to go in and pack up all the boxes. And I had 3 piles of surveys about this tall to work, plus all these deals of like chow, which is change of ownership for you guys that don't know information. So like the facility changed owners and they have to go through this whole process. So I have a big old stack of that stuff to work, and it was just there. And so I'm packing it up into boxes going, what is in here that I don't know about? So I can move, and everything that we could process was digital. And so unless I was able to scan it that day, like that child information, I couldn't touch that for a while. So same thing with them inputting the information. So it was just way easier for us to just call and get it. We just kept this little tracking spreadsheet where we could take care of it. So every once in a while we get one that we haven't sent anyone a survey in a while. And I called like several places yesterday to get email for that reason. Because not only do we have the 300 and some odd, I want to say 30 or 300, between 30 and 50 nursing homes, we have like 90 something ICFs. We have hundreds, I'm just going to say hundreds, I don't know how many at this point, because I know there's like almost maybe 675 facilities or something like that of adult daycares, assisted livings, and res cares. So we can't keep up with who's where most of the time. So, but that's the way we do it with Osbelta. I mean, we're going to send them what we have, and sometimes we'll get an email from the administrator when they get the tag. We'll say, well, I was an administrator at that time though, and then I'll just have to, pass it on basically. But usually that's rare because administrators usually will just deal with it with Osbelta, present their case to them. Okay. But we try to make sure that it's the right person because it's less hassle for all of us that way. Continuing non-compliance. So this is not a regulatory term. However, it means repeated deficiency. Okay, so we go out in April, for example, and we cite S600, and we go out to do the revisit, and it's continuing, like they did not correct it all. It's continuing non-compliance, okay? Maybe we go out for a complaint at that time, and we cited on that one, and it's still continuing non-compliance. Sometimes it can even be, maybe there's already non-compliance going on because there's been multiple surveys, but we cited F600 on this one, and then we clear it, but it's already been cited on another one. It gets cleared, but it's continuing, and there's barely any gap between that compliance. Sometimes CMS will determine, no, that's non-compliance, and they're going to be more likely to penalize that repeated tag, acting like there's no compliance in between, because it's just going back to old ways all the time. Okay, describes the situation and whereby newly found deficiencies continue and enforcement action that was originally based on a prior survey. So yeah, we go out, we clear it. Maybe you don't clear all your tags, but we clear F600. And then we have a complaint come in 2 weeks later and we cite it, then it's going to be something that's continuing on compliance. In order to end an enforcement cycle, the facility must have a period of substantial compliance. Okay, so that is when all of your tags are corrected and cleared, or they're cited at C and below, and you submitted a plan of correction for it. That's the tag. Okay, so you are in substantial compliance until another deficiency is cited. Now it can be on a complaint or something else. It can be on a COVID survey. You're in substantial compliance. until you're not again, basically. But that's what officially ends that cycle. A new cycle starts with that new survey. So then you will then get a new DP&A date and a new 6-month termination date with that new cycle start date. And you'll see at the top of your enforcement letter, you'll say cycle start date, and it will identify when the cycle started for the survey information that you're getting. So maybe it's the 3rd survey that you've had on that cycle. It's still going to say what your cycle start date was at the top, okay? Okay, continuing non-compliance. The standard survey, you had it in February. We go back in March. We have the complaint survey at a G. So both of those are now out of compliance. May 1st, we go back and there's a complaint investigation cited as scope and severity D. May 15th, you have the survey team come out and they clear the standard survey and the complaint investigation. And they work in complaint investigation IJ. So therefore, you have 2 right there that are now out of compliance, the May 1st and the May 15th IJ. On the 25th, the IJ is removed and it's at a E. On July 15th, they come back to do the revisit. And it's cited at a D. It is not cleared for that May 1st survey, but the IJ is cleared. Now your termination date is August the 1st, because that is 6 months from that cycle start date, which started with the standard survey February 1st. That's when you run into a problem because those things are not cleared. They're going to have to come back real quick and sometimes on the day and do a revisit to this complaint investigation that was only cited at a D, guys. Okay, so be on top of getting those corrected and, as quickly as possible. Now, I understand right now, things have taken a little bit longer to get to you from us. Basically, because we sent letters out and then they changed the regs right in the middle of us sending them, and then we had to go back and reissue the letters. And so as of yesterday, I was working the surveys from now that I was receiving on a daily basis. Now, there's no telling what's in my inbox when I get back today, but it was up to date. And so I was working on the ones that I had received Friday through yesterday. So we'll see, hopefully that can continue. But this is when you run up to that mandatory term date. So be on top of knowing when your cycle started and when your mandatory termination date is, so you can try to get all the wagons in a circle and get them corrected as quickly as possible. And keep them that way so you don't have more complaints that you're going to have to worry about if they do get called in. Okay, period of compliance. Okay, so February 1st, you have the standard survey cited at E. March 1st, you have a complaint investigation, citation at a G. May 1st, you have a complaint investigation with a citation at a scope and severity of a D. May 15th, we come back and we do revisits on all 3 of those surveys and clear them all as of that day. Okay, so then we come back on the 25th of May with an IJ, which is removed during the visit. The thing is, and what's awesome about this is your cycle started over as of May 15th. I mean, it ended. So when we come back for the IJ, your new cycle start date is May the 25th. Okay, so the original one on that first was February 1st. put in substantial compliance on May 15th. You have that period between the 15th and the 25th of substantial compliance till the IJ is cited, which starts the brand new cycle. So you've got 6 months from the IJ and as your termination date, okay? What's awesome is the complaint investigation. The IJ was removed during the visit. So therefore, your DPNA went from the possible 2-day DPNA to a 15-day DPNA. So your denial of payment on new admissions will go into effect 15 days from the 25th. So when you get it cleared on the, what's it called, 15th of July, you do have some, a month or so that you're not gonna, month and a half or something like that, that you're not gonna have payments for those new admissions, but it could have been worse. Substantial compliance. Deficiencies pose no greater risk to resident health and safety than the potential for causing minimal harm. No deficiencies are higher than a C. Remember, if they're cited at C, they will still require a plan of correction, but you are in compliance at that point. The remedies that are issued or authorized by Medicare and Medicaid, through 42 CFR, there's this area, alternative remedies to termination. There can be some alternative remedies to termination. A lot of that is when we assign a temporary manager to take over the facility, and sometimes they have assigned a temporary DON to take over a facility. So that DON then has to train the other, because if there's a lot of nursing issues and there's a lot of nursing care needed, like vent facilities and so on, there's not resources there. Sometimes that does happen. It's not something you want to go into because it's hard to get out of once you get there. But I mean, it is something that is an option. State licensure has many similar policies as well.
Hey, Lisa, is that temporary? Is that assigned by the state or is that a state employee?
Sometimes CMS will determine that it's needed. They will communicate it to us and we have a limited pool of who can do it. And sometimes it's administrators or somebody from another facility. And sometimes it's somebody that has previously worked from the state that's in that pool, stuff like that. I honestly don't know who's in the pool right now, but I know last time we had an issue come up, like, because it don't come up very often. Usually they're bumping up to termination, and a lot of people get pull it out like right at the last minute. We've only had that happen, I think, once since I've been with the state, and the pool wasn't very big at that time. But we've had so many people retire. I feel like the pools should be bigger. So.
Who pays for that? Wherever it's lobbied, the issue or the
I
tag?
believe that money penalties that are paid in, they can be used for different projects, but that would be something that could be used with those money penalties. Just have to write up we can get it approved. But, okay. So I'm not going to go over this because this just regurgitates the same information, guys. You can read that just as well as I can, but it just outlines some of that information. But I will look at this part. We do base those remedies largely upon that scope and severity. So that's why I point you to keeping that handy. If you are an ICF, then you have conditions of participation. So that's a little bit different. We're going to talk more about that the next time we come back. but mainly the focus is at nursing home today. So, largely on scope and severity. We look at the highest scope and severity because that's what drives the penalty. IJ deficiencies require immediate imposition, of course. Substandard quality care also requires immediate imposition of a CMP. And then, of course, the nursing home administrative board must be notified, and the physician's, residence physician has to be identified and notified as well. Okay, I'm gonna close this one out. You guys can look at that. If any of you have questions about any of the information on here, here's where your money goes, by the way. Where does all the money go that's collected? Must be applied to the protection of the health and property of residents of facilities that the state and CMS funds non-compliant. It may not be used as operating funds for the state. CMPU funds have been used for, one, provider training, pays for all those handouts and getting the speakers to come in from places and all that good stuff. Also, it pays for funding and expenses for when it's necessary to relocate residents because we couldn't find them placement and your facility's closing. And then one of the things that has been used for recently is the music and memory. To purchase those iPads with the music specific for each individual for the residents. And then there's also been some COVID related things that if you've ever tuned into the long-term care meetings usually on Wednesday, I believe, they talk about some of those grants and stuff in there as well. So that's where all the money goes. If you have questions, our emails are on here. Patty is most knowledgeable. Like, I wish I could like clone her brain and stick it in mine when she leaves because like she can rattle it off. And if not, she'll tell you exactly where you can go find it. And I'm gonna miss her. Anyway, so Patty's about to retire and leave me.
Ready for that? No.
I know. Like at first she was gonna retire at the beginning of September and then COVID happened. And then my supervisor retired instead. And so she took that date because she did ever see Patty announced it. So now Patty's gonna retire like, she says between now and February. But she's like, probably the end of the year. So I'm like, yeah, I totally see that.
Yeah, 2020 just
I mean,
taking it.
Sue had been here 39 years with the state, in different places. And then Patty, but she's our department manager, so that's scary business. I have to work for. Okay, I'm gonna let y'all take a break and then we'll come back and we'll review the immediate jeopardy information. Fast and Furious.
This conference will now be recorded.
Thank God I didn't like do anything else. But like, yeah.
Okay, we're getting back started. We're gonna talk about IJ and the appendix Q, which was updated recently. Recently, I mean, last year.
Yeah, I printed it. I think I dropped this one though, so it's probably not in the right order.
Okay, there are 3 components of immediate jeopardy: culpability, harm, and immediacy. Immediate jeopardy is cited at level 4 severity. So this would be, excuse me, this would be J, K, or L on the scope and severity grid. Okay. For those of you out there, you can refer to this on your, on the PowerPoint provided. Some of this information we cannot zoom in on, or I'm not going to zoom in on it. Some of it, I've just got the information for you, and it's not exactly clear. I did not necessarily make this PowerPoint from scratch. I adapted it for something that was used for surveyor training. So in 2018, Oklahoma had 13 immediate jeopardies cited at the scope and severity of J. 15 cited at the scope and severity of K, and 1 cited at the scope and severity of L, for a total at level 4 of 29 for our state. That is 7.4 citations per million. Per type of survey, it is listed below. So 6 of those cited at J were cited on the annual recertification, and 7 of those were cited on complaints. 5 of those cited at K were on the annual, and 10 of those were on complaints. And then, of course, that 1 that was cited at L was on a complaint also. So that is what Oklahoma had in 2018 for IJs, which you're looking at going, dang, that's a lot.
Can you give an example of like what in the world would you have to do to get it now?
That would be really, really bad.
I mean,
Let me get further into it, and I may have some pop into my mind. I wish I could remember the one I just saw. I'm working it today, and it was cited at an L, but I just kind of like glanced at it. Because I was like, at the end of the day going, do I think I can finish this one today? And then I decided no.
no, probably not.
Before I got too far into it, I was like, I have 20 minutes left, and that's not going to happen. So that's going to be what I deal with when I get back. Yeah, before I left, because I knew.
Maybe next time you come.
I knew what was like there on the ones that were, I like looked at all of them and like prioritized what I should do when I get back. So, because we try to work all of them, all the IJs, we try to get them out as quickly as we can. A lot of times we know that there's an IJ because we get informed there's an IJ when they're in the facility and they cite the IJ. It seems like from our end, we're watching for it and we've got this thing flagged forever. We're watching and waiting, and it seems like it takes forever, but a lot of times it's under, surveyors have written it up and then they've submitted it for review, and it's got to go under review by the coordinator before it even gets to us.
It takes forever on your end. What about the?
I know. We've been lucky, we haven't seen a lot of them lately. We've only seen past non-compliance ones that are getting called out on complaints. People are getting them fixed, so I've seen several of those actually through the COVID thing, because people will call it a complaint, but then the facility's got it fixed, and so they'll go out with the COVID and the complaint that will have a past non-compliant IJ, that everything's fixed, and so they just get cited the money penalty at that point. Okay. So for our region, however, 7.4 citations per million is what it was for Oklahoma. If you look at the region, Louisiana had 3.8 citations per million. Texas had 9.7 citations per million. If you look at those numbers on the line that Texas has, it's a lot. It's also a very big state with lots of metro areas. New Mexico, 17.6 citations per million. And Arkansas, 34.6 citations per million. So as far as we are concerned in our region, we're not the best, but we're not the worst. That doesn't really mean anything to the individual that's being harmed in the IJ though. So it's important that, first of all, resident care is most important. Okay. This gives a broader scope on what it is from region to region. The only region that has a higher IJ total is the Atlanta region. And that'll be the Atlanta, it'll be Georgia and the surrounding states that are in that region, or by that regional office. But this is just national information. So if you look at it, compared to Atlanta, oh my gosh, yeah, they got a lot. We have a lot too. And those low areas that have less IJs are Denver, the Denver region, and the New York region. Okay. We don't need to worry about all this a whole lot. It was just giving you some statistics from, history from 2018. Okay, national in 2018, the national average was 6.4 citations per million. So we're just, a million or so above that, which is not necessarily great, but Okay, Appendix Q updated. Okay, so Appendix Q, which is deals with immediate jeopardy, was recently revised to include all provider types. That means long-term care, ICF, life safety code, hospitals, labs, and suppliers are included in the new Appendix Q. Well, we don't deal with all those at the long-term care enforcement. We do deal with long-term care and ICF. Safety. It is designed to create more agreement and consistency. Because before, I think some of the providers were like, how come they do this over in this, for hospitals, and then this other does this? And it was just like, let's just make it across the board. This is the definition. This is what the concepts and the terms are. It created a core appendix with provider and supplier specific subparts. Long-term care, subpart X and appendix PP, for examples, but we're going to look at the key changes. Immediate jeopardy, a situation in which a recipient of care has suffered or is likely to suffer serious injury, harm, serious impairment, or death as a result of a provider's noncompliance with one or more health and safety requirements. So, is likely to suffer serious injury, harm, impairment, or death. Okay. Or they have suffered it. Has suffered, is likely to suffer. Both are important. As a result of a provider's non-compliance. Something happened and you weren't in compliance with the regulations, which is how it got to that point. Culpability. So this is the new component to determine immediate jeopardy. The old versus new. Old is culpability. Oh, excuse me, new is non-compliant. So before, the facility had to be culpable for that harm. Now we're not looking at that so much as something happened because the facility's non-compliant. Harm was the old, now it says serious harm, serious injury, serious impairment, or death. Immediacy. Need for immediate action. So we used to look, the surveyors used to look for culpability, harm, and immediacy. Now they're out, if they see something, they're judging it with these areas. Non-compliant, serious harm, serious injury, or serious impairment or death. And that's either suffered or is likely to suffer, so please remember that. Immediacy, there is need for immediate action. Three components to determine immediate jeopardy. Those are those three components: non-compliant, serious harm, serious injury, serious impairment. Whoops, it just kept going. Serious impairment or death, and the need for immediate action. Okay, non-compliance. We're going to talk about that first. And it's an entity has failed to meet one or more federal health, safety, and or quality regulations. If they are non-compliant with one of those, that equals deficient practice. Therefore, a tax would be cited for that deficient practice. An example of non-compliance that may be IJ. A wandering resident. The staff were unaware that the resident eloped. Facility failed to provide supervision for a resident with known wandering behaviors who eloped from the facility. The deficient practice would be cited at F689 on this one, or it was cited because we use real examples. 689, free of accident, hazard, supervision, and devices. Most frequent written IJs. Abuse. Out of those that were in 2008, when we were preparing this, or we were preparing it last year with the 2018 information, 9 of those IJs were cited for abuse. 6 of them were cited at F600, which is free from abuse and neglect. There were 2 cited at J and 4 cited at scope and severity K. So that was at a pattern at that point. So scope and severity J is isolated. So there may be maybe it's not necessarily pervasive through the whole facility or widespread or pattern even through the whole facility. Maybe it's not even one resident, but it's one staff that minimal harm is with the 2 residents that they worked with. It can be with one resident or one staff, or, but anyway, that's where that isolated comes from. There's a minimum. K, at a pattern. That's when it could be related to more than one resident, or more that maybe it's a shift. that's doing something that they're not supposed to, something like that. Those are just examples. It could be only with residents that elope that are on that hall. So there's some kind of pattern to it, basically. F610, investigate, prevent, correct alleged violations. These are abuse violations. There were 3 citations. There was 1 IJ. What's the other? 3 citations, 2?
2K.
2K. I don't want to move that around, so I don't have to. So 2 at K. So proper investigations were not done. Proper reporting was not done. If you have an allegation of abuse, you're supposed to investigate it and report that to the state. I sit right next to somebody that reviews incident reports all day long and calls facilities requesting more information. So yesterday, she was reviewing this incident and abuse allegation. And she calls the facility. She's like, I need to see your investigation notes on this, and why did you not report that, nurse aide or nurse, I don't remember which one it was. Why did you not fill out the form to report that, nurse? Well, we decided they didn't, there was no fault. It doesn't matter if there's fault or not. You still have to fill out the paperwork and report the person, even if you find that they didn't do it. That's just part of the investigation process. It was alleged that Joe Blow abused this person. This gives tracking for next time when Joe Blow gets somebody alleges he did something. We can actually track this person and how often their name comes up, because some of these Joe Blows can move from facility to facility, getting by with just enough to not get caught. Okay, so, and it may not come up through your the word slipped away from me and I'm losing my voice and breath. It may not get caught when you're when they're getting hired and you're doing all the background checks and all that jazz. I mean, there's some out there that are, they're going to be facility hoppers and they're going to do just enough to not get caught. And that's unfortunate, but it's true. It's the nature of some people. Okay. Pre-accident hazard supervision, there were 4 citations. And that was cited at 689. One of those was at J, and the other were at K, scope and severity. Also, there are frequent tags written for immediate jeopardy for pressure ulcers. This time in 2018, there were 2 citations. Both were at K, which meant that there was a pattern. And that's tag F8, tag 686. I have F880 stuck in my head. It's real hard to overcome because I say it every day. Okay, so 16 facilities were responsible for those 29 citations. Okay, just 16. Three components to determine immediate jeopardy, a closer look. As a result of the identified noncompliance, serious injury, serious harm, serious impairment, or death has occurred, is occurring, or is likely to occur to one or more identified recipients at risk. So because of that noncompliance, we've got some serious issues. Either they've already happened or they're likely to, if we don't get some immediate action really quick. What is serious? At some point, the harm that was caused or made likely should be determined to be more serious. if there's a pattern of non-compliance, more people are not following the protocol for maybe wound care, measuring and checking pressure ulcers and those things. If that is not done regularly, you're gonna have more likelihood for that to become serious. Does anybody disagree with that? Okay, if there's no plan on how we're gonna address these individuals that are wondering, and maybe the middle of the night shift, they don't know that plan. And wondering happens on that shift. And it continues to happen on that shift. You're gonna have more likelihood for something to be a serious issue on that shift. So there, at some point, it's gonna become more serious. It becomes like pattern, because all the staff, but guess what? When the new staff comes in and they see that that's going on, primarily they're getting trained by the people they work with on their shift. And it will continue. Maybe that person transfers to another shift, and then they've been there a while, then they're gonna teach that shift how to do it. So it becomes a problem with time and lack of attention to what needs to be done. So it becomes more serious. What is serious injury, serious harm, serious impairment, or death? Adverse outcomes which result in or are likely to result in death, significant decline in physical, mental, or psychosocial functioning, loss of limb or disfigurement, avoidable pain that is excruciating, and more than transient or passing. Other serious harm that creates life-threatening complications and conditions. Right now, COVID is a huge focus of all these COVID-focused surveys. I have not seen any IJs written for COVID currently. There are IJs that are being cited out there, but they're usually for the pressure ulcers or the harm that happened to this resident. However, going forward, some of the facilities, and I'm just saying this in general, there are some facilities that continue to not follow COVID protocol. And when we're going out there multiple times and new deficiencies are being written each time we go out, or non-compliance is continuing at F880, you're gonna have a higher likelihood that at some point it's going to become more serious. So if any of you, or is anybody in here, and I'm not picking on you, because I know this happens. If anybody in here work for a facility that hasn't been issued a DPOC or F880 currently? Okay, because if not, that's great. But just know that if you have, just paying attention to and doing what the DPOC directs you to do is very important. There are some folks that have followed the DPOC. They've submitted all their information. We go out and do another visit and they clear. And so we can remove the DPOC. They're only going to get that money penalty for what, if it was warranted for whatever, however many times they've had this F880. Oh my gosh. Anyway, so they're going to have that. But there are other facilities that we're going out. Maybe we've been there 3 times and they're still being cited the same deficiency. And so the DPOC is still continued until they're in substantial compliance. And if we still have the same deficiencies, or you have the likelihood of it getting worse with the next visit, it could possibly, they're not following the protocol for prolonged periods of time, could affect more people in the facility, which would then eventually it could get to the point where it could be an RJ. Let's hope not. Okay. What is likelihood? The nature and or extent of the identified noncompliance of the extent identified noncompliance creates a reasonable expectation that an adverse outcome resulting in serious injury, harm, impairment, or death will occur if it is not corrected. So, is there a likelihood or a reasonable expectation that it's going to have a bad or serious outcome if it's not fixed quickly? Example of likelihood. People over 65 and children under 5 have the highest risk of fire death. Okay. Cigarette fires cause close to 1,000 deaths and 3,000 injuries each year in the United States. In fires attributed to dropped cigarettes, there is 1 death to every 4 injuries. Clothing-related burn injuries involve 3 main factors: the fabric, the wearer behavior, and the heat source. The age profile for cigarette fire mortality shows a steadily rising rate, which peaks above age 85. Elderly who smoke, especially males, are exceedingly vulnerable to smoking, fire, death, and injury. This vulnerability is even greater if the elderly smoker uses sedating medication. So how many of you have smokers in your facility? How many of them are on meds that may, interact with that? Okay, so they already have a likelihood of being more vulnerable, whether they're over 65 or not, just from that. If they're over 65, then you have a greater vulnerability. Okay, example of a non-compliance a non-compliance that may be an IJ. You have an unsupervised smoker who was care planned to be supervised. So you have non-compliance already because the facility doesn't have him supervised, correct? Okay. He was observed to smoke while wearing his oxygen at 5 liters per minute via nasal cannula. So then you have a serious likelihood right there, right? Facility failed to provide supervision with smoking for a resident who requires supervision. So the deficient practice is going to be written at 689, free of accidents, hazards, supervision, and devices. Now, he's unsupervised, he is a smoker, and he's using his oxygen while he smokes. Excuse me. Do you think that fits all 3 pieces of those criteria? Do we need to take care of it now? Okay, so that's your need for immediate action. It needs to be taken care of before something happens. Okay, non-compliance creates a need for immediate corrective action by the facility. It's not enough that, well, you've got the non-compliance, you've got the likelihood for serious harm, injury, death. At that point, if you have those 2 pieces, you probably need to go ahead and circle your wagons and come up with what your immediate action is going to be. So this is not just for waiting for survey to identify these for you. If you see the issue, identify it yourself or with your team so you can address it before it becomes a bigger issue, okay? You don't want to wait till something happens, somebody's hurt or survey comes in and cites it. You want to fix it. Well, the fixing's good. Okay. Surveyors will notify their team leader immediately of any IJ concerns. If they have those pieces to the puzzle, they're going to be making a call, or they're going to talk to their team leader, first of all, that's on site. There's going to be somebody that's identified as the team leader while they're in the facility. And then at that point, the team leader is going to call their assigned coordinator, which used to, ICFs were assigned by this person, and this person was seen by, all the assisted livings had this person. It's not like that anymore. they're separated by region at the state now. And so you could have somebody for your region that you've never dealt with before, and you may have a different survey team that you've never dealt with before from now on. Because all the surveyors are for the whole state. They're not separated by assisted living, ICF, nursing home, or any of that. They're all just surveyors. So this survey team could be going into a res care this week and going into an ICF one week and a couple nursing homes also. So you got people that are going to be hopefully well-rounded. So they're going to notify the medical coordinator of the state, and then they're going to have a discussion about the information and evidence that's there. They're going to determine if it's a true IJ or not. Okay. The IJ template. Surveyors are going to notify the administrator of the IJ, and they're going to provide a copy of the IJ template to the administrator and request a plan of removal. An IJ plan of removal. A plan of removal is not the same thing as correcting your deficiencies. You've got to put a plan in place that will remove the immediacy of the situation. Okay, so how are we going to put duct tape on it for now? Basically, you're going to put a plan together on how you're going to get that removed so it's not a need for immediate. What's your immediate action going to be, and how are you going to go forward? Because when you receive your statement of deficiencies, it will have the deficiency written out and everything. It will also include what you said was your plan of removal in it. Okay, so facility submitted a plan of removal at blah, blah, blah at this time. And down here, state or surveyors accepted the plan of removal at this time. That doesn't mean anything yet until the facility has completed all the steps of their plan of removal, and they will put the date and time. So your IJ dates that I'm going to be looking at and that CMS is going to be looking at is when the IJ started. So the start date, if it was prior to the survey even entering your building, and it can be, it'll start then and it will end when the plan of removal is completed, okay, as the IJ date. And then maybe the IJ was at a K and they removed it down to an H. They removed the IJ, but it's still a harm because somebody got hurt. Then, so this part, these days up here that it was in IJ, they're going to be at this higher civil money penalty amount, and then it gets lowered to what the H CMP is until it gets either dropped and lowered. You maybe get it, maybe you don't get it corrected all the way, but they drop it to an E. And at that point, like on the revisit, at that point it'll be like, $150 or $200 or something a day. But you've already had all these citations, these civil money penalties this whole time. But your money penalties in when you're in substantial compliance, basically. So you can have IJs that, thousands of dollars a day, tens of thousands of dollars a day. And then you might have H's cited at, $1,500 a day. And then if it drops to an E, it'll be less, and so on. But it's not going to end, that money penalty does not end until it's in substantial compliance.
Isn't the maximum 10,000 a day?
No, ma'am. That changed, it may be that for, yes, I don't know. But it's way more for nursing homes. I want to say it's high of 23 or 24. I can't remember the exact, for the time that you're in IJ. I can't remember the exact because it's very rare that I have to put that in there. I use what CMS gives us, and I use the information that I see, but the CMS reviewer that's been trained on all this stuff at her level, she's an RN that specializes in this and this. So she sees that this is, that there's really egregious stuff, going on, she looks at all the details. And so she's also gonna apply that double G information too. I just tell her if it's a double G. Praise God. It's great for me because, I mean, I don't like to be the one bearer of bad news, honestly. But if CMS has that final word on those penalties, and yeah, it's just, I haven't cited a whole lot of them at L level, and that's why I don't know what those high numbers are at this point. I have cited some that are like 23 something a day. So for the IJ, so you hope it's gonna like get that plan removal and get it taken care of real quick, because a lot of them get removed the same day that they're starting. But every once in a while, you have some that are going on for 3 days or something. But I usually don't see them that go on for weeks, so. Okay, so the survey will give you this template, excuse me, and it has basically their information. This is what the preliminary fact analysis, which just, puts together the non-compliance. And anyway, they're going to request a written plan to remove that IJ, to make it not be an immediacy for them, okay? Removing the immediate jeopardy. A plan of removal is required and must be provided as soon as the facility has identified corrective steps. So you want to gather whoever's going to be the brains of the operation and who's going to help you get stuff done, whoever has the knowledge, so you can come up with a plan to remove that IJ. You're going to put corrective steps together. There is no requirement that the IJ must be removed prior to conducting the exit conference. Enforcement gets notified by the team immediately. So they're in the facility, we're going to get an email that an IJ's happened. So I've had that IJ that came in, been watching for it, and finally came in, and I was like, I don't have much time to do it today. But when I get it, I have basically at the most 48 hours to get turned around on it. So I usually don't keep them that long. This was a weird situation. It came in at the end of the day. There's no federal requirement that surveyors must remain continuously on site until the IJ is removed. Before, surveyors would remain on site until the plan of removal was accepted and it was removed. It is no longer, it's not a federal regulation that occurs. They like to get an approved removal before they leave. And sometimes they come back on Monday to make sure it's all been carried through with, and they will remove it. And they'll look at your information back to the date when that last person completed the last task to remove it. So if they're coming in on Monday to see that you've completed the removal, sometimes they can remove it all the way back further than that, but then before they left that Friday. Like it could be all completed by Saturday night at midnight because you've had enough time to see all the shifts, but it won't be able to be removed unless you have that documentation improved and they can go around and ask people on all the shifts. They were trained on it, so whatever the issue was. Surveyors must be on site to verify IJ removal. So if they leave and your IJ has not been removed, when they leave on Friday, and they're telling you this, they're gonna have to come back to verify that it's been removed. So that will either be the following week, more than likely. And then sometimes, like we had situations with COVID, sometimes that changes because if something happened and there's an IJ at another facility that either has COVID and it's COVID related, they're going to be pulled there. Once the IJ's been removed, the 2567 will be completed and a POC completed to achieve substantial compliance. Okay. So we're gonna send you your deficiencies. It'll say whether your IJ's been removed or not. It'll say that. Then you'll have 10 days from the date that of the letter that you receive it, because we are pretty good, especially on IJs right now, of making sure we confirm receipt that day, because we want to know that you've got it. If we don't confirm receipt that day, then we're confirming it the next morning, because we need to know that it was received by the facility, so they're aware of it, because they have 10 days to submit a plan of correction. Okay, so your plan of correction, you're going to submit just like normal. We're going to go over plan of correction here briefly in just a minute. But you are not working on, at that point, removing it to do that immediate action. But to make sure you get it completely corrected, you can correct the deficient practice and keep it corrected. And have a quality assurance / monitoring of that in place and ongoing. Okay. Regulatory definitions. Yeah, and now as I'm starting to run out of voice here, so. Immediate jeopardy means a situation in which immediate corrective action is necessary because the provider is non-compliant with one or more requirements of participation or conditions of participation, has caused or is likely to cause serious injury, harm, impairment, or death to an individual receiving care in a facility. So ICFs have conditions of participation. Either the conditions are considered met, meaning they're, there's not a bunch of deficient practice going on in those areas, or not met. If a condition of participation is not met and it has likelihood to cause injury, excuse me, harm, impairment, or death, then you're probably you're going down the IJ road. Immediate jeopardy means a situation in which the provider is not in compliance with one or more of the requirements of participation has caused or is likely to cause serious injury, harm, impairment, seriously, or death to a resident. Watch this not work now. Oh, it does. The verbiage should be removal of the IJ. Important to communicate removal or plan of removal when communicating with the facility and with the survey team as well. So the survey, the IJ removal is when all the things in the plan have been completed. The plan of removal is actually what you're going to do to remove the immediate immediacy of the problem. So components to determine an immediate jeopardy non-compliance, serious harm, serious injury, serious impairment, or death, and that means the likelihood or it's already happened. And the need for immediate action. Okay. We have one more quick presentation. Plan of correction. This is why I'm running out of voice, because this is usually around the time Sue jumps up here and Hodgson will probably take a little bit extra time on some of that other. So why are they important? Why are plans of correction important? Well, an acceptable plan of correction may be the basis for Medicare and Medicaid certification and continued reimbursement when the facility is not in compliance. So that's why they're important. And I will tell you what I have to do. Every time we send out a plan of correction acceptance letter, I have a form I have to go in and complete for your facility that gets sent to the healthcare authority. So that way they know, hey, they submitted an acceptable plan of correction, so they should be good, unless they're not when we find out next time. But that way, they're finding that stuff out from me because I'm sending it every week. And then also I send them a list and that form again every time a facility is back in compliance. So tomorrow I work half the day and I'm like super excited about it. But that's going to be my main task, is putting all that together for the healthcare authority tomorrow and sending them a copy of all those POC acceptance forms and all those substantial compliance forms to the facilities. So, it also helps us, like, at the state level, if they go back and do another survey that's on the same cycle, let us know, well, they've already got this plan of correction accepted, and that way we know what's going on in the middle of the cycle. We try to get plans of correction accepted prior to sending people out there to do a revisit. That has not happened lately because because we're working with surveys that are pre-COVID and then COVID and then current. So right now, this is a whole different operating time for us, even though COVID's going on still, it's got some different things going on for us that involves. So we're working on 3 different ones. So I'm sending out plan of corrections on all, we're sending out acceptance letters and rejection letters on all 3 of these kinds. And after so many rejections, at some point we can just start sending people in to do the revisit. Because usually we don't accept more than a rejection more than 2 times. We can't reject one more than 2 times, but we're in some unprecedented times lately. A plan of correction constitutes an affidavit that the facility will take action to achieve and maintain compliance, which is why that signature on your plan of correction is important, because you're giving us an affidavit stating that this is what you're going to do and that you, in good faith, are going to try to get this under control and put it back in compliance. In many cases, an acceptable plan of correction may be a legal basis for delaying imposition of penalties. If we have a good plan of correction in place, at some point we haven't done the revisit and you've already had a second survey or maybe a complaint survey, and you've got continuing non-compliance, that may be the point where CMS is like, well, we've already said they're gonna do this, so let's see if they get it done before we start imposing more money, any money penalties. So, okay, overview. Plan corrections are in the federal regulation, they're mentioned in the state regulation and statutes, and the timelines for corrections and revisit are as well. Okay, and CFR, the plan of correction subsequent to the exit conference, each facility is required to submit a plan of correction that identifies necessary changes in operation that will assure correction of the cited deficiencies. How many of you sat in exit conferences within the last year? Okay, if you sat in a nursing home conference, in an exit conference, you're going to be given and they may do this in ICF, so I'm not real sure because they were going to do a special form for that, I believe. But they give you an exit conference sheet, and it basically says all this information on, what the plan of correction is, and these are the things you want to make sure to include in your plan of correction. On the back, it has areas of concern, and they may list those areas, and they may list some examples in there. A surveyor usually provides this to you at the end. They may ask to make a copy for themselves, and they'll get the administrator's name at the time of the survey and the email to send the survey to. And they'll give you a phone number or an extension number of who to contact if you have questions or if you haven't received it or anything like that. If you have information that you told the surveyor that you were going to try to get back to them, at that time, they'll have an extension you can call state. So those are exit forms, I think is what they're called. Anyway, it has all that information. So every time we have a survey come in to enforcement, we have that copy of the exit form, and especially if it has a complaint attached to it, then we're gonna definitely receive that exit form. But so that way we know who to send the email to, unless we see that it's changed recently. Okay. In reviewing and accepting a proposed plan of correction, apply these criteria. Does the facility have a reasonable approach for correcting deficiencies? Is there a high probability that the planned action will result in compliance? And is compliance expected timely? Okay, so when you're putting your plan of correction together, and while I'm thinking about this, the facility is going to give you that information with those areas of concern. They talk about it, and most of you will be taking notes in your exit conference anyway, so you know what those areas are. Usually you know about them before the exit conference because they talk to your staff and everybody, but sometimes they might talk to the staff and the staff never tells you about the conversation or whatever. So you do not have to wait till your 2567 comes in to start correcting. You know basically what the issues and concerns are. So the best deal is to start your plan of correction, start figuring out what you're going to do to fix it ahead of time, so you're not trying to hurry later on when you get it. Yeah, you may not have every single detail covered in it, but if you pretty much know, that gives you, a head start. When we started sending out all these deficiencies on the F880s and the DPOCs, we got lots of calls, and people were freaking out. You mean we only have 10 days to do this? Well, you've always only had 10 days before your plan of correction is due. That's always been the case. Your plan of correction is due 10 calendar days after the letter that we've confirmed receipt and so on. So that hasn't changed. But you've known about the deficiencies sometimes a lot longer than that because they've done an exit conference with you. So technically you've been notified of the non-compliance, that's the time to start working on how you're gonna fix it. And if you've done that, it's gonna be way easier by the time the deficiencies come to put your plan of correction together. The enforcement processes mandate that policies and procedures be established to remedy deficient practices and to ensure that correction is lasting. Specifically, that facilities take the initiative and the responsibility for monitoring their performance, for monitoring their own performance continuously to sustain compliance. Measures such as requirements for a plan of correction emphasize the ability to achieve and maintain compliance, leading to improved quality of care. Okay, we want you to maintain compliance, not just get compliance, okay? So I know that there is turnover out there in DONs and LPNs and administrators and your office staff. Everybody at the state knows it because we go through it too. The thing is, when you're going in and as a new administrator, one of the best things you can do is to look at the last year, at least, of deficiencies and things of correction. You can then know what you have, what's been done in the past going forward, so you know what to look for to see if it's really going on still as a new administrator. Now, if you go and talk to the nursing department and they're not doing this anymore, or they're doing this, why? That's fine. People can change because they can move to better things that work better for their facility. But you don't want to get into a situation where you are getting tagged for the same thing. And why did you stop doing that? Because that was what worked for. And some facilities have run into that when they changed new DONs and the DON didn't know what was going on. So if you get a new DON, let them read, get them to read those last ones and see what's going on. Sometimes talking to the staff is not enough because that staff may be doing something that they're really not 100% on board with, that they were made to do it, and that's okay. It's just that your DON's the one that's going to be in charge of setting that up, and they need your support doing it. The importance is maintaining compliance. So if you do go to that new method, because this is what's working, well, can we maintain compliance this way? Continuously monitor and show that you can, so you don't get the deficiency in that same area next time. 5 elements of a POC. How corrective action will be accomplished. So you're going to tell us how the corrective action is going to be accomplished. You're going to address the other residents that have the potential to be affected by the deficient practice. You're going to address the measures put in place to ensure that the deficient practice doesn't reoccur, like we just spoke of, and how the facility plans to monitor its performance. So you might start off with something that this is what's going to be done, daily or every week, and then how are you going to back off in your tracking? There's got to be continuous tracking going on, but it doesn't mean it needs to be daily or weekly or even monthly after you get the hang of it. But for a while, it may require that, basically. And then you're going to set a date when the corrective action will be completed. Now, this also includes that you have monitored to make sure for a little bit that it's been completed. So you might do daily or even shift on some things at the beginning, and then after a week of doing that, say we're going to do weekly. And do it weekly from then on until determined otherwise or something, whatever works for your facility. But you're going to come up with a date that is going to be your plan of correction date, your alleged correction date, that you're going to put in that right-hand column when you do your plan of correction. Acceptable plan of correction. There's some information on this sheet. and there's a little bit on the other handout that I gave you with terms and definitions. You have 10 calendar days by federal guidelines to submit your plan of correction. By state, it says working days. We just do basic calendar days the whole way because that's the highest, that's the least amount of time per guidance. And you're gonna have 60 days to correct maximum. So you don't want to put your plan of correction date over 60 days out. And in fact, if I were you, I would get it into the shortest amount of time possible. And if you can do it in a month, I mean, that's pretty standard. A lot of people put a month on there. If they can get it done by then, because that gives them plenty of time. Usually they're not running into a DP&A. However, if you do have a 15-day DP&A, you want to be very cognizant of that and watching where your plan of correction is going to be. Of course, I mean, as an administrator, you're dealing with care and everything going on with all the residents and everything, but you're also dealing with the money people up at the top. And if you don't take care of that, you might be saying goodbye soon and looking for another job. I'll see administrators that come through here, and I know an administrator that was told if he got anything over a G, he was going to be let go. So, I mean, that happens out there. It just depends on who you work for, what that corporation is, all that. So, okay, then you want to have your 2A documentation reviewed. And, when your surveyors come in, they're going to go and they're going to want to see what's going on. They're not going to want to look at all your paperwork right then when they come back for your revisit, most of the time. They want to go out there and talk to people, see the residents, see if there's proof and evidence that it's corrected, and then they may come to ask you something to provide corrective evidence, okay? They've got to see all the sides of it. Okay, you will receive a plan of correction acceptance or a rejection letter. Acceptance letter, it'll say your plan of correction has been accepted with a correction date of whatever you said your correction date was. If it comes to you and it's incorrect, you think it's incorrect, notify us, just send us an email back. That's not the correction date that I put in there. What we're going to do is go back to your plan of correction and we're going to look at all the dates and tell you why that date was selected. Because sometimes people put plan of correction dates over here and they don't realize that in the body of their correction, there's a date later than that. And we have to go by the latest date. Sometimes it's our fault because somebody made a scrivener's error and put the 21 instead of the 12 or something, or July instead of August instead of July or something like that. Yeah. Okay. So you can also get a rejection letter. So if we reject your plan of correction, it will tell you why. It will usually say what tag and why. If you were only cited one tag, it may just come out with why and not have the tag number listed. But it'll give you the reason. Most of the time lately, I've seen them going out because they don't have monitoring. The monitoring is not in there, and that's kind of why I was harped on that long ago. But there's not enough monitoring going on to support it being corrected. And then you'll also receive an opportunity for the IDR or a hearing on the POC rejection. Now, if you have a POC that's rejected, then your 10 days start over. You have 10 more days to submit the amended POC. If I were you though, I'd want it out of my hands and out the door for somebody to review, because you know how the turnaround is on that. The surveyor, if we receive it, the survey, we just have to send it to the surveyors, and then they have an allotted amount of time that they can review it too. And with as many things going on right now, some of those surveyors don't do it till the end of that time. And then other days, on Monday morning, I come in and there's 50 jillion POCs accepted and rejected. So, okay. Revisit date versus compliance date. The revisit usually does not before the latest date on the POC, but not always. Because sometimes we have to come out for a complaint or something like that, and we just decide if you're ready, we're going to do the revisit too. On the first and second revisit, compliance date can be the correction date that you actually submitted on the plan of correction. Earlier or later, it might be determined based on the evidence that the surveyors found. But on the third revisit, the compliance date will not be before the date of the revisit. Okay, so I'm saying the revisits to whatever specific survey. So standard survey is worked, and then we come out, 2 months later, you're not in compliance, and the next time, not in compliance, then, oh gosh, now we're not in compliance this other time. It's not going to be before that date, no matter what you put on the plan of correction at that point. Okay, revisit date versus compliance date. Okay, so you have the survey exit. They have a date of the first correction. Oh my goodness, this is survey. Okay, survey exit. I gotta back up so I can read it even. Survey date. Then you have the first correction date. They come. It's not corrected when they do the revisit, which is a date later than that first correction date. So that first revisit is after the correction date, and it is not corrected. Then you submit a second plan of correction with a second correction date. The revisit is well after the second revisit date. And it is still not corrected. The third correction date then has to be planned, and you'll put it on your POC. When we come back on that third revisit, we will go with the date of compliance, which will be that revisit. Okay? And that is basically revisits to the standard or the complaint survey. So the one that ends in 1-1 is what started it. 1-2 is the revisit. And the second revisit is 2-2. I'm sorry, excuse me. 1-2, 1-3, and then that next time we come back is that 1-4. And that will be whatever date that was, is going to be your correction date. If you're in compliance, hopefully. Okay, plan of correction is submitted within 10 working days. Describes the action taken or proposed to correct the violation. Describes the measures put in place, or the systematic changes established to prevent reoccurrence of the violation. It provides a fixed time frame with which the violation will be corrected. The plan of correction applies to the residents affected, and it applies to the residents potentially affected. Defines who is going to correct an efficient practice. Like, you're going to have to assign somebody to do some things. It can't just be the facility will do this, because that does not hold anybody accountable. It could say the facility will do this by so-and-so doing this, not the person's name, but their title. Defines who will correct an efficient practice, defines a measure of the outcome. How are you going to measure and monitor to make sure it stays corrected. Defines what data is going to be measured. Defines where the data is going to be recorded, when the data is going to be recorded, who's going to monitor the implementation of the POC. It defines what POC actions are going to be monitored and when. Defines what outcome will show correction. Who will evaluate the outcome data, and defines when will outcome data be evaluated. Defines decreasing monitoring when it's corrected. It's a lot of stuff, y'all. Monitoring and measuring your outcomes is super important. We're writing the POC, you want to read it. You want to read the regulation and the interpretive guideline if needed. And that part of it's right there on the paper, on the planet, when we send you the deficiencies. If you need to go look at the deeper meaning, then you can go to the reg book and look at it. But the basic statement is right there. Review the deficiency, the regulation, and interpretive guideline with the QA team and draft a plan with your QA team. Review the plan against the POC requirements, modify it if needed, and finalize it. How do you integrate the POC into your QA program, guys? Like, if I wanted to make it part of my quality assurance program, how do I do that?
Performance improvement plan and continue monitor.
Yeah. You're gonna do what's set forth in your POC, and how, as a QA team, are you gonna monitor to make sure we stay in compliance with these afterward? So maybe if you're going to your QA monthly or whatever, this is what's going on. Are we going to change any of these protocols? Is this something we've been monitoring for? Maybe we've been monitoring this for 6 months. We've been in compliance for a while, but we want to change the way we monitor it or what processes. Say it in your QA, so that way if they come back and they don't think you're in compliance. Well, this is what we went to. This is how we're monitoring it now, and that will at least know that you've been watching it and addressing it at least. It may not cure the whole thing, but it will be helpful instead of saying, no, I don't have any of that information. Okay. I don't know if that was the end or if I accidentally, yeah, okay, good deal. Anybody have any questions? Okay. If you have any questions that you think of afterward, you can email Patty or myself, and we'll try to answer the question or point you in the right direction to where you can get your question answered. And then, other than that, review your information that we provided you. I will say that this federal regulatory groups for long-term care facilities and your scope and severity grid, keep them handy because it lists all the tag names on here too, so that's great. And what tag number they go to, so that's, for the federal tags anyway. So that's really handy to have. Other than that, I think you're good for now. And then I'll be back next month with assisted living and ICF social focus data. And I guess you guys are at lunch till Dr. Wynn, I think. Yeah. Okay. Okay, well, thank you guys. Can we leave this in here?